Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay Hae podcast. Today, I'm joined by musician and writer James Yorkston to talk about his latest novel, Tommy the Bruce, which is published with Oldcastle Books. Hello, James.
Hello, Alistair. How are you? You all right?
I'm very well, thanks. I'm very well. Could you give us a synopsis of Tommy the Bruce?
Of the novel or him himself?
Well, the novel. Let's start with the novel and we'll go into details of the character.
He's a guy who's found himself not quite halfway through life, but a good bit into life, and he's not really enjoying where he is. He's not really enjoying where life has put him. He has a lot of worries, financial and mental. He's got bad memories and all that sort of stuff, and I'd say he's sinking. And then along comes young Fee, and she kind of allows him to swim a bit. But whether or not he's swimming into a safer place, who knows?
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it, actually. Because when we first meet Tommy, he's inherited this hotel, so he's running it, and it's failing, and he's kind of failing. He's existing rather than living. Was that a good way? Is that a fair way of putting it?
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly right. Which is what I see with a lot of people, and unfortunately, they find themselves in positions that perhaps they wouldn't have chosen when they were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. So why was this a story that you wanted to tell? Why did this appeal to you or sit with you?
I tour a lot in real life. I've been a working musician since I think I first started touring in 2001. But I was playing music way before then, all the way through the 90s. And I go to a lot of these places. After shows, you end up in a lot of hotels. Now, a lot of the hotels are just branded hotels, so your Travelodge, Premier, and that sort of stuff, And there's not a huge amount to say about those sort of places. But every now and then you'll have a show in the Highlands or in Perthshire or in rural Wales or just somewhere in England sometimes. And you'll go back to the hotel, you'll maybe get there at 11:30, 12, 12:30, and there'll be some kind of commotion going on. And the commotion won't be anything exciting, but it'll just be the bored doer bar staff talking to the barfly who is just dying to leave. He just really wants the guy to go, And it's that kind of thing has always fascinated me, these kind of small town characters. I'm from a small town myself. I live in a much bigger town now. But I'm from a small village myself. So it's just the idea of looking into one of these places in more detail. Yeah, that's what it was.
Because there's lots of lovely detail in the book about working in hotels and even in the service industry. And it made me think, is that something that you've experienced yourself, or is that just from the other side of the bar, so to speak?
Yeah, no, when I was a teenager in the East Nook, I mean, I draw a lot on that. But yeah, when I was a teenager, I worked on farms, I worked on hotels, worked in bookshops, just did all sorts. But yeah, hotels were part of it. I worked in the Scores in St Andrews, and I worked in another little restaurant whose name is, what's 37 years ago, 38 years ago, I can't remember the name. So yeah, there's been plenty of that, but mostly it was coming from the other side. It was coming from the visitor's point of view, if you see what I mean.
A couple of things that stood out to me was washing the dishcloth in the dishwasher, which is a nice little detail, but also the way that lies kind of almost become habitual, saying, oh, the chef's off today, he's had there's a problem, and then getting out the frozen peas and sausages. I just love the way that Tommy actually, and it's a kind of sign, I guess, of his underlying character, manages to do it. You would kind of think in his situation, you go, I can't do this. This is overwhelming. But because he's always done it, because, it's really, he manages to do it.
Yeah, there's a huge fictional aspect of it. These guys have to be able to do it. Yeah, but no, I mean that's it. That was the kind of the whole thing. It's as though he's barely in control of an old bus that's shuggling all over the world and all over the road, and it's just kind of continuing with him due to he just doesn't know what to do with it. He doesn't know where to steer it. He doesn't know how to change it. He doesn't know what to do. So it just kind of carries on. The bills get paid, the money drips in, and he's just kind of surviving. I mean, I can't go into too much detail here, but I've seen friends trying to be as vague as I possibly can. I've seen vague friends' businesses struggle due to that exact same thing. They find themselves working somewhere that perhaps isn't for them, and it all just goes to pot because they don't have the energy, they don't have the engine. Tommy does kind of have some kind of engine just to keep things going,
Yeah.
but he's not a particularly happy individual. Certainly at the beginning of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, you're talking about the barfly that people want to get out. His relationship with old Jock, is that right? That's the
Yeah.
yeah. That's one. I mean, I worked in bars for many, many years, and sometimes that can be as close to family as some people
Oh
have.
yeah.
Tommy's lost his family, and old Jock's come in, and that relationship can actually be quite a profound one.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was younger, before I had kids, I don't want to say I was in a pub every night, but I was in a pub quite a lot. And they're the people you meet. They're the people you talk to at the end of your day. They're the people that you discuss the small problems and also after a few beers, the big problems. There's no dismissing of such folk. And also, old Jock was Tommy's dad's pal, and he's really there keeping an eye on Tommy. That's really his main thing.
Yeah.
Or is Tommy keeping an eye on him? I mean, they're there for each other. Uh, I think Jock's. I mean, he was based on one guy that I used to share a few beers with in St Andrews, who'll be long dead now because this is 30 years ago, and his name was Jock, and it was just. I don't want to say it was social work because he was a very independent person, and he didn't need looked after, but I guess he did need his pint at the end of the night, which was totally fine. And he was a lovely guy, lovely old guy. And when I moved out of the Snook, that was the last time I saw him. When I moved to Edinburgh, I never saw him again. So who knows?
And I think as well, hotel bars or hotels in smaller areas, there's often a social aspect to them because if someone who is a regular doesn't come in, it's noted. There
Yeah,
can be, I don't know if it's still the case, but certainly where the kind of hubs of community.
yeah. I mean, I can't really talk about what it's like now because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm a touring musician, so I'm on the road a lot.
Yeah.
And when I'm on the road, I allow myself to drink alcohol, not a huge amount, you understand, like maybe a pint after a gig, that sort of thing. So when I'm at home, I try not to drink at all, except between Christmas, my birthday, which is just before Christmas, and New Year. I allow myself those 10 days to drink at home, just good red wine and dark chocolate.
Yeah.
But I don't drink at home at all, other than those 10 days. So I don't really have a local here.
Yeah.
So I can't really comment anymore. But certainly in the old days, and this is what the book is written about. That was the feeling. And that happens in the book as well. There's wakes and there's weddings and there's meetings, even if the meetings are only like young chooks causing trouble. There's all sorts going on. So I mean that is no, it's a community place, as you
Yeah.
say. It's a community place, and I think part of the reason why it's still afloat, why Tommy's uh, hotel is still afloat, is because his only competition closed down because it couldn't keep the numbers going. So it's that kind of distilling of people. Oh well, if there's no choice, then the choice is made. You go to Tommy's place.
And in terms of place, it's never named. I think you describe it elsewhere as the Oxter of Perthshire, which I love
Yeah,
that. Yeah. But there are tourist buses kind of coming through, and the other people do arrive, and and leave. So you've got this kind of mix between the people who are set in place and those passing through, which I think is interesting as well.
It's in Fife, there are loads of tiny wee villages that you don't see unless you're driving around, unless you come off the main roads, you take a shortcut or whatever, then you'll come across these tiny wee villages. This Pittsnedden place, which I've just made up a name for.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be one of those places. It's across between one of those places and like a much smaller Aberfoyle. You know, so it was once on some kind of route, but the A9 has bypassed it. And it's just a tiny place, the place that I would live in now if I didn't have a family desiring to stay in the relative metropolis of Celadike, you know. So it's just one of those places. I mean, growing up in Kingsbarns, which was there was like 150 people there, less than 150 when we were kids. That was it. You just rubbed along with everyone, you know. And I loved that kind of community feel. I love that small sense of community. You know, even here in Celadike, you'll go out for a walk in the morning and most people say hello. Yeah. Oh yeah, you know. And then I'll go down to London for a meeting and it'll be like Crocodile Dundee. I come out and at first I want to say hello to everyone, but then I realized no one says hello in London. Yeah. And you're best just not to even look at anyone in London. But I prefer the kind of friendlier nature, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And my brother lives up in Braemar. He's been there for over 25 years. And when he comes to Glasgow, it kind of freaks him out. You know, just the amount of people rather than anything else.
It doesn't, yeah, it does kind of freak me out. It's not as bad as it was when I first started going down, but now I do it so much. And once, you know, we've toured India a few times.
Right.
And we played, I think, three of maybe 4 shows in New Delhi. And then once you've done that, I mean, everywhere looks pretty quiet, you know, even London. But you learn the hacks. So when I'm in London, I stay in King's Cross. So I get off the train and then I can walk maybe half a mile to somewhere quiet, in a quiet sort of area, sort of local area. And you just learn your little hacks to kind of get by. But no, I don't find cities particularly pleasurable places to be in.
Yeah. So, what came first with the novel? Did you have the central character? Did you have a story you wanted to tell, or was it place? Was it that, you know, wanting to write about small town place?
I had the idea for the story,
right?
And then Tommy, I thought, would be a lovely guy to be able to write about. I mean, I do have a soft spot for soft guys. You know, most of my pals are pretty easygoing, laid back. You know, you're not going to get into a fight with them. Yeah. You know what I mean? Most of the time, we're just laughing at the absurdities of the world, you know. And so putting a character like that in, I thought would be fun to write, and it was fun to write, you know. And of course, you don't really know how these characters are going to react until stuff happens. And then once you're in the skin of the character, I remember speaking to a friend of mine, and he was going to write a novel. And he's a guy who's achieved a lot in this world. So I totally believed that he was going to do it. And he was asking if I had any advice. And I was just saying, when you're writing a novel, you just have to push yourself through that. There's a kind of tricky part where you can't quite get in to the flow of writing a novel. So it's slightly different. Well, it's kind of the same with music. You're writing music, and if you're in the flow, it's a lot easier. But right. Getting into the flow is a bit trickier. But with a novel, I've found, once you're in the flow, it's kind of tricky to get out again, because you're loving these characters. And I say you, one, but really I mean me. Yeah. I'm loving these characters, and I'm curious to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
you know, and it's not like a Dungeons and Dragons thing where what's not Dungeons, you know, the roll your own role play thing where you
Yeah,
say,
all the books where you
yeah,
jump.
yeah, yeah. If you want Tommy to hit the guy, turn to page 33, you know, that sort of stuff. Though maybe it should have been like that. But there is a sort of element of what's going to happen next, and it kind of follows you follows me around my day. You know, I'll be in the kitchen, I'll be making a coffee, and I'll be thinking, maybe Tommy, maybe this could happen, or what if that happened, and you know, that sort of thing. So it can be a really pleasurable thing to do, write a book,
Yeah.
so long as you don't look at something like the word count and think, oh my God, how am I going to fit in an extra however many thousand words? But I stopped doing that years ago. So
It's interesting. I've spoken to a few writers who really find writing the first draft quite painful. They wouldn't describe it as an enjoyable thing. And the book actually emerges in the edit. And then that's the kind of enjoyable process. I wonder.
that's kind of what I mean. It's like the first bit is quite tricky. It's kind of quite hard getting into that bit. But then I found once I'm beyond that bit, once I've climbed that hurdle, it's a lovely place to be in. But yeah, absolutely. That initial bit where you're that can be a bit trickier. You know, I've sketched out my next novel. I mean, I haven't begun it, but I've sketched it out. And because I do music and I do books, one of the great things about it is I've you know what it's like. If you've got to do the washing up, you'll do anything to avoid doing the washing up. You know, oh, I'll just go and paint the shed. Or if you've got to paint the shed, you'll do anything to avoid painting the shed. Oh, I'm just going to go and buy a pizza or something. You know what I mean? There's always that thing. So I guess there is a slight trepidation with beginning the next novel, but I'm looking at how I've written it down and how I've plotted it, and I'm looking forward to getting into it. But anyway, the point being, at the moment, I'm doing anything I can to avoid starting it. So that really means I'm just writing loads of songs, which is really my bread and butter. So
Yeah.
so that's not a hard thing. So the good thing is with the music and the books, when you're not doing one, you can do the other, and it's a change is as good as a rest, that sort of thing, you know.
I love that idea that your avoidance is actually also creative. So,
Hmm.
you know, you think, well, I'm going to put the book, I've got songs I can get on with, instead of saying, you know, I've got the book, I've got the dishes to get on with, which, you know,
Yeah.
that's great. And it's
But
a nice balance.
I love music, you know. Like you, Alistair, I absolutely adore music, and almost every aspect of what I do, I enjoy. So I love the writing. I especially love being in the studio with my pals. The interview thing. I'm not talking about you now, Alistair, but you can imagine when you do an interview, like when you put an album out, or I put an album out, and Domino line the interviews up, and you'll maybe get, like, over the course of a thing, you'll maybe get 100 interviews. That could get quite tiring.
Yeah.
Because people do tend to ask the same questions. But the initial sort of 10 interviews or so I enjoy. And I love the touring. I love being in different towns, different cities. I love traveling, you know, and I love playing with people. So there's so much about it that I absolutely adore. And the book thing is just kind of like it's like, imagine you've got a house that you're quite happy with, and then you're built on a new room,
Yeah.
and you're actually really into that room as well. You know, that's kind of how I feel about it. It's a lovely thing to be doing alongside my music.
I was going to ask you about that balance because in music, you're often collaborating with other people, particularly recently. And of course, when people imagine writing fiction or writing any book, it's a solitary exercise. And is that balance quite nice as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons why I like working with other people, but also because I've had amazing opportunities. So the writing is solitary, but that's why I like it, because, you know, I was in bands in my 20s. I was in a band with, actually, your listeners will know him, with Vic Galloway.
Yeah.
I was in 2 bands with him. Now, Vic's real name is Mike, so I'll just go back to calling him Mike. Mike is like he's probably my oldest friend. He's one of my 2 or 3 oldest friends. I've known him since we were 3 or 4, something like that. And I love him dearly. and he's great fun, and we'll go at the pub and we'll laugh and laugh and laugh. And like if anything serious happens in our lives, like when my father died, when his parents died, we're straight on the phone to each other. You know, we're good friends. But see, when we're in a band together, we just argue, you know, we just shout at each other, you gotta do that, that's fucking shit, all that sort of stuff, you know. And we didn't get on well in a band. We had the same kind of ambitions, but musically we had very different ideas. So now I love to write solo, totally solo. But then because like the last record was with Nina Passion from the Cardigans. And I toured with Nina most of 2023. We were on the road. That's including press weekends and traveling to gigs. We did something like 60 shows, and then we did 3 or 4 press weekends in different cities, and that sort of stuff. So, you know, we're away a lot, and it's just a great fun.
Yeah.
And you can imagine working with someone the caliber of what Nina does with her voice and the way she sings and the emotion she puts into things, but also because she's great fun to be around and she's very easy company. Why would you say no to that? I couldn't say no to that. I love, like you, Alistair, I love music.
Yeah.
And as I've said, and one of the things I love the most is the voice, you know. So of course I'm going to work with people like her and Sahel Yusuf Khan, who's just an extraordinary vocalist.
Yeah.
And on this next record coming out this year, there's another vocalist who I can't mention just yet, and they were amazing as well, you know. So it's just like, oh, the kid in a toy shop thing. Oh, do you want to work with this amazing person? Oh, yes, please, yes, please. That would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. And you said earlier on that when you get into this skin of, let's say, Tommy, you're interested to see how things are going to pan out. And that's one of the things about reading the novel I found was particularly the relationship he has with Fiona. We haven't mentioned Fiona yet. She offers him hope. But as the reader at the beginning, you're never sure about intentions. Maybe she's not sure about intentions. But as secrets are revealed, you know, the way you think about both of them changes. Was that the same writing it?
Fee is supposed to be the grown-up in the situation. She's had a rough life, but at the same time, I think it was a little tricky because I had to keep it ambiguous. I had to keep Fee's intentions, or I wanted to keep Fee's intentions slightly unsure, because, well, just to keep the book going. You know what I mean? But I always wanted to write her as a loving and strong character, and I've come across I've encountered it's tricky to say. I've encountered ladies in the past who are similar to that. You know, they weren't coming from great backgrounds. If you looked at the chances of them doing well, you perhaps their background would put them in not great, but they get through and they do well for themselves, and that's what I wanted for Fee. But at the same time, there has to be that sort of ambiguity, because if you don't quite know what she wants, like if she just came in and she was a Mother Teresa figure, then it would be like, well, what's going on here? But because there's always that slight thing, is she a cuckoo? You know, what's going on? What's going on?
And also, as I say, she kind of gives Tommy hope, whereas before he's just been existing. But there's danger that comes along with that, literally danger for himself. And I wondered that idea of opening yourself up to the possibility of happiness can bring risks.
Oh yeah, of course it can. Of course. I mean, if you open your heart to anything, if somebody comes along and stabs you in the heart, it's going to be sore. But I just think with Tommy, he was just over, and it was almost as if anything was better than nothing. And that's what he went for. And you can see as the book goes on, he's questioning and he's doing the sums and he's saying, this is still better than before, right? This is still better than before. And also, well, maybe I shouldn't say it, but you know, he's bless him, he's getting a lumber.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that will focus the mind often. Yes. But you're absolutely right. It's like even when secrets reveal themselves slowly, he's almost making the kind of balance in his mind. Well, you know, how do I progress here? Because it is a shift from what's gone on before. And he wasn't really looking for it. He certainly didn't expect this to happen. It's literally when Fiona's introduced, she comes into the bar and then it's not the case that she takes over, but she just helps. She offers him help. An act of kindness, you would say.
Yeah, an act of kindness. And yeah, you have to think, you have to wonder what was going on in her mind.
Yeah.
You have to wonder. But it was mostly alcohol. It was mostly running away, trying to find what she was doing, trying to find where what she was going to be, and finding a relatively safe haven, you know, with soft old Tommy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it was somewhere where she wasn't rejected. It was somewhere where her mother wasn't shouting at her. It wasn't. It was somewhere where nobody was taking advantage of her, where she could believe what they were saying, and it just added up, slowly added up.
And what comes with Fiona is if Tommy doesn't really have any connections apart from old Jock, Fiona brings with her family and other relationships which are complex.
Yeah, but that allowed me to write about Mika, which I thought was who was probably my favorite character in the book. In fact, maybe I should have written a little more about her. But yeah, I mean that allowed me to dive into my past and delve somebody up. I mean, everyone's got families, you know. Everyone's got, you know. I'll be on the road. I'll be with somebody I know pretty well. I'll be touring and touring, and then suddenly you meet their uncle or their aunt or their sister or whatever, and they're completely different people.
Yeah.
And that's it with family. Family are just completely different people. So yeah.
And how do you approach creating these secondary characters, a kind of ensemble cast, if you like, which builds as the novel progresses?
I just wanted to put people in that I could kind of play with. I mean, Mikura is kind of there as a comedic character, but you're not really aware of that at the very beginning. Well, at least I hope not. It's supposed to be, she's supposed to kind of be a slight irritant to Tommy, to make him think maybe this isn't everything it could be. And so that people from my past really who can fit into a book. Like Birmingham dude he just came completely fully formed. Like he's just a guy who I know, and I haven't seen him for a while actually. I thought I saw him in the service station in uh, what's the name of that service station? The one at the end of the A702. Is it Abington? I thought I saw him in there, but it was a lookalike, unfortunately. If I could have said, "Hey, man, you're in my book," yeah.
So that's brilliant. You've got these people. It's important then to kind of picture them. If you know them, you know you've got to kind of have a sense of what they're going to look like, and then they do what they do.
With these characters, it did help. Yeah, it definitely helped. Just you know, they are kind of based on people, but they're not. They're kind of slightly overinflated versions, you know, taking the aspects of them which will work for the story.
Yeah.
Rather than I think that must just be a thing that everyone does, right? I mean, I think when one is imagining anything, I think it's almost like if one's thinking about a castle, I mean, a picture of a castle comes in your head that you've already seen. And I think when you're writing a book, or when I'm writing a book, I think it's very common for character traits of well-kent people to come in. That's what I think. Though I could be, maybe I'd have to speak to another author about that, and they'd say, no, I just completely make somebody up from scratch.
Mm.
And then I'd probably say, but even if it's the smallest aspect of someone, you bring them into characters, or I bring them into characters.
Yeah. I guess that helps certainly with, because there's a lots of lovely detail about people, the way people dress, you know, the kind of, particularly some of the stuff that they're forced to wear latterly, which is and
That was just supposed to be fun. I mean, that was supposed to be fun. I mean, the Birmingham dude's in a kilt,
yeah.
and he doesn't wear a sporran. And I've always thought, I mean, you must have seen folk in kilts without sporrans, and you just think, what are you doing? What's going on here? I mean, we don't need to see that you're not wearing a sporran. And also, why aren't you wearing a sporran? Sporrans are amazing things, you know. They're really handy things, and they hide a multitude of whatevers, you know. But it's that kind of thing. It's just like, yeah, they're there, you know.
And also, I would give anything away at all, but the idea of what constitutes a smart suit, I think, is a kind of interesting one as well.
Yeah, again, that was kind of for comedy, and it was just like, and you know, that was probably also from ordering too many clothes online that end up being 17 sizes too small or big, you know.
But it seems a lot of the central characters, the ones that are from that Tommy has known kind of all his life, their roles are kind of set at school. And is that something you think happens, particularly if people don't leave a place, if they stay in the place that they then went up? Or it's almost difficult to break out from signed roles from an early age.
School's a really tricky thing, you know. So what is it? And is it 13 years? 13 years I was at school in Scotland. And they're formative years. And yeah, I don't really want to talk of any examples here, but people do tend to stay in lane.
Mm-hmm.
I've found. And I think you're absolutely right that there's the when a friend of mine was when a friend of mine was dying, he had to go to hospital quite a lot, and one of the people he met in hospital was a lady that he went to school with that they'd always not gotten well. They'd always argued and all that sort of stuff, and you know, they'd been in different gangs or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
But because they found themselves in the same cafeteria, they got talking, and they ended up, I wouldn't say they were chums, but they ended up being quite a consolation for each other. It does happen, but at the same time, if you've made your pals already, you're going to stick with your pals rather than the people who are troublesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Or like, maybe from a troublesome's point of view, why would you hang out with that musician? You know what I mean? What's he doing with that guitar? That dafty, you know? So I think, I can't remember what you asked, but I think people do stay in lane, really.
Yeah.
And why not? It's more comfortable, you know?
In terms of Tommy, people who then come back into his life who he knew from school for various reasons assume he is a certain way, and perhaps when they meet him, he is a certain way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, do people change that much?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's an interesting question. But you do push, I mean, events unfold and Tommy is pushed kind of harder and harder. And it made me think almost of the Western, or the kind of quiet man, you know, as eventually pushed too far. And there is a sense kind of the Wild West about the novel in a whole, a kind of lawlessness, if you like.
Well, I love those stories, you know, and I love uh, Zatoichi. Do you know
Yes,
you know
absolutely
Zatoichi, of
love it.
course.
Yeah.
So Shintaro Katsu. I think those films and the TV series, it's basically the same plot every time. Now, Tommy can't be that because Tommy isn't a blind swordsman, you know.
That would be a twist.
But that would be a twist, yeah. But no, there is definitely a thing about that. Is definitely a, you get the dopamine hit, you know, when the character finally gets their comeuppance or finally does the best he can. And Tommy himself, he doesn't actually, I mean, he does his best, but it's not as though he suddenly grabs a shotgun and goes on a rampage.
No.
You know what I mean? I mean, he just reacts in I remember a friend of mine having a fight when he was like 20 or something, and he was just like me. He was just this kind of big, affable guy, you know. And we were in a pub, and one thing led to another, and he just had a fight, and it was like a great big teddy bear going into a fight, and it was just like, what's going on here? This is just completely incongruous.
Yeah.
And Tommy is kind of like that, and his fight scenes, he's kind of terrible.
Yeah.
You know, he's not like,
yeah, he can't suddenly, you know, make out moves or anything like that.
Do you know that Sherlock Holmes film with Jeremy Brett? I can't remember which one it is, where like Sherlock Holmes, he always uses his mind, and then there's this one amazing scene. I wish I could remember the story, where Jeremy Brett suddenly comes out fighting, and he has his fists up, and he does the Queensberry rules thing. Yeah. He fights like this, you know, and it's amazing and it's hilarious. But I mean, it's great when it works. But I didn't want Tommy to suddenly be. And then I remembered that 20 years ago I'd learned judo and I could flip this guy like a leaf. Yeah. You know, it had to be this kind of. He had to keep in character as this kind of gentleman.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You know? Who's doing his best, and in fact finds himself in these increasingly dodgy situations, all because he's trying to do his best and keep what he now sees as his family together.
Well, it is his family. I mean, it's a bit of a ramp to get to that family, but it's definitely his family, or he's definitely hoping and trying and kidding himself and persuading himself that it's his family.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's lovely how the book goes from him having really nothing except getting up every day and pouring the first pint and, you know, cleaning the bar or whatever it might be, to having all of this things which he loves, and there's a fear he may lose. You know, it's quite a, I hate the word journey, but you know, it's quite a move from one end to the next. I guess that's what a novel should do, should take you through those things.
But he's still a miserable bam throughout it. You know, even when he's got the partner and child, you know, he's still fucking moaning about everything. You know, you know, it's like you go on holiday, but remember, you're going to be there. Yeah, you know, you can't suddenly break out and say, "Oh, well, I'm not there. It's going to be a lot of fun." He is still there, you know, with all his issues, you know. So
he's got some legitimate moans at the end, though, I would say. So
yeah.
Absolutely. Are you going to be doing readings with the book? Is that something you enjoy doing, kind of book events?
Yeah, I think there's four we've got set up at the moment, or maybe 5 book festivals. I think they're all in Scotland at the moment, and I've got one reading in which is set up so far in Toppings in St Andrews, and yeah, I can't remember. I mean, I think there's 4 book festivals that have been booked into this year, but I'm not sure. Top of my head, I can't remember. I'd have to look at it.
Well, if I find them out, I'll put links to them on.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And in terms of music, what's next works for you? Are you working on something? I guess you're always working on something.
Yeah, I'm writing the new stuff at the moment, but I recorded an album last year, and that's coming out this year, and that'll be on Domino, and that's with my Swedish friends. And I can't really say any more than that, other than Nina's on it, And yeah, so that's all I can say. I think that's all I can say. And then I've made an album which so the Domino album is you know, all the effort's gone into it. It sounds amazing. We've recorded it in an amazing studio, all that sort of stuff. And I'm very happy with it, of course. And then I've also made an album with David A. Jaycock
Right.
and Lena Langendorf.
Okay.
So David A. Jaycock is an English guitar player, very much indebted. Or no, he's not indebted. He's not very much indebted at all. But a lazy way of describing his playing would be say John Fahey.
Right.
But he's obviously he's a lot more than that. He's hugely into his jazz and all that sort of stuff. You know, he's quite a unique guitar player. And Lena Langendorf is a saxophonist who plays with a second-hand orchestra in Stockholm.
Right.
And she's released a few things as Langendorf United, and she's an amazing player. She spends a fair bit of time over in Ethiopia playing, and she's very influenced by the Ethiopian players. So I've made an album with her and David A. Jaycock, and I'm playing nickel harper throughout. There's no vocals. It's entirely improvised. So we've found a couple of labels for that, and that should be coming out at some point next year, but I don't know when. I've got to chase them up. To be honest, I've had other things on my mind, but we've done the cover and all that sort of stuff, and we've sent them the masters and all that sort of thing. So at some point in hopefully in 2025, that'll be coming out as well. But I can't. Yeah, no, I can't wait. I mean, I think it might sell as many as 25 copies.
Well, I'm certainly looking forward to both of those. That sounds amazing. James, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really enjoyed it, and all the best with the book.
Thanks, Alistair, and really good to see you as ever. And keep up the good work. It's you're always showcasing interesting things and playing good music on your show, and it's yeah, all good, man. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.